So, ladies and gentlemen, here we go into our final session. And what better way to start our final session, which is our theme is your marketing story, than with our next keynote speaker. Did you know businesses such as Nike and Google invest heavily in storytelling? These brands use storytelling as a way to connect their why with their customers. Sas will show you how to create your business identity using your company narrative. She's got a talk entitled Using Your Story to Make an Impact. And so it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to the one, the only, Sas Huntwood.
Woo! Thank you very much, Wayne. Thank you, Gary, for inviting me today. I hope everybody can hear me okay. That's great. Okay, as always, with a great storytelling, I have to start with a great story. So are you here sitting comfortably? I shall begin. It started with a great laid plan. And it started with someone being highly organized that they recorded their keynote before they came on holiday, just in case of technical issues. And of course, in true Grecian style and total disorganization, the meeting room was double booked and a doctor takes preference over me, apparently. So I've been running around finding a space in which I can actually talk to you today and tell you some stories. So hence why I'm here today. So I know it's a great way to start. So let's think about storytelling. When did you last tell a story? Now, I'd place money on this, that it was probably in the last hour. Wayne has just told us a story. Perhaps you were speaking on the phone to a loved one, maybe your child, or maybe it was on a Zoom call with a colleague or networking. And I bet in the last hour, you've told someone a story. If you think about it, stories we've used throughout history to educate, entertain, warn about dangers, guide people, but more importantly, we use them to connect with each other as human beings. So if we want to be able to connect with our customers or potential customers, then we need to become master storytellers. And that's what we're going to go through today. And what does that look like? But in order to become a master storyteller, we have to start in the past. And we have to learn more about how can storytelling in the past help us now. If stories allow us to form connection points with others, I want you now to think of a story that you tell over and over and over again. It's maybe a story you tell around that dinner table that makes people laugh, cry, create a better understanding about something. My father-in-law is a classic storyteller. And as soon as he starts telling stories, his whole family roll their eyes as they've heard this story 100 times before. When I first joined the family, I sat there attentively listening to this story. 16 years later, I've now heard that story 100 times, but he keeps retelling it. So think about that story and why do you tell it? Well, we tell that story because we want to create a connection point with someone. And a connection point I see is like opening a door and inviting someone in. By telling a story about yourself, you're saying to someone, here's a little bit about me, so please tell me something about yourself. Now, some people would say this is the law of reciprocity. I prefer to think it as an unseen human bond. And that's what I believe storytelling is about. It's unseen human bond. So next time you're thinking of speaking with someone and you want to make that connection, especially if you're finding it hard to build a relationship with someone, tell them a story. If history is to teach us anything, stories have the power, I believe, to change every relationship we have. So let me take you on a journey. I want to just take you in a time machine. You're going to love this. Wayne will love this bit. Take you in a time machine, back in time, okay? And I want you to look at how we're going to trace storytelling. And we're going to understand how we've used stories to communicate what we stand for, our values, what we have to offer, and the very basis of who we are. We believe marketing and brand storytelling and social media and the way we use stories now is new. Let me let you into a little secret. It's not. It's thousands and thousands of years old. We are nothing different to our ancestors. We're just using different channels in which to tell stories. So if you go back 30,000 years ago and we go to southern France and we're living in caves, we tell stories by depicting everyday activities on paintings. We paint on the walls. We tell a story of what life was like then. We then pass stories through oral means, sitting around that campfire. And then much later on in history, we started to write them down. In fact, the ancient Greeks were the first we know to have written them down. And they left messages in poems. And if you ever read one of their poems, a poem could fill a current 500-page book today. Now, that'd be quite an epic book for Karen to get involved in. So a 500-page poem, that is exactly one poem would fill a whole book today. However, writing was really reserved at that time for the wealthy and educated. But most of the ancient Greeks told their stories orally, so they passed them down through generations. They traveled from village to village to village, retelling their stories, and that was how storytelling got passed on. If you think about it, it's a bit like our modern way. We retell stories through social media channels, village to village, whether it's through Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're just going from village to village, retelling our story. Now let me take you in a time machine. I want you to take us to China, and it was a hotbed of storytelling, always has been. And I want you to take you to 202 BC. And there we find a lot of historical figures being used to tell stories in decorative mirrors and on decorative furniture. A bit different from that corporate brochure that you probably put together recently. Or how about that good old Bayeux tapestry? Now, anybody schooled in the UK will remember the Bayeux tapestry and having to learn about it in history, about William the Conqueror and the Battle of Hastings. And the cartoon-esque nature of the tapestry tells many a story. It's a unique part of our history, and European history particularly. Maybe that was the forerunner of the Beano or the Asterix. Or maybe you like humor, particularly someone like Keith who likes to use humor. You like to tell a story, maybe about your brand or customers using humor. Then I hate to tell you all that, again, this is nothing new. I'll take you to the year 1200 and to Japan now, and there's an extremely humorous storyteller there. No one knows his name, but he produced amazing fine painted scrolls where animals behaved as humans. And many people believe this is the beginnings of manga. Or maybe you like a good fictional character in your storytelling and you want to tap into people's imagination. Well, you can look at J.K. Rowling, produced arguably a highly successful series of stories. However, she was nothing new. If we trace her inspiration back, we find Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And actually their inspiration came from Andrew Lang from the 1800s. So again, history telling us about the storytellers and the different types of stories we can use. Or maybe you like a folk tale. Now here in Crete, where I am at the moment, oh my goodness, I asked the lady this morning, the waitress who served us breakfast, about folk tales. Oh, she sat down next to us and retailed some amazing folk tales, very geographically centered around where we're staying at the moment. And often you can find they're quite famous, aren't they? Particularly where you live, I imagine there's probably a good folk tale or two. So all in all, we've got quite a good pedigree of storytellers, haven't we, to draw upon? You think about it. They've all left a legacy of storytelling, which we can also tap into, but also leave, I believe, our own storytelling footprints. But how does this help me, Sas? How do I relate the history of stories to my current business or my brand? Let me show you. Firstly, we've got to tap into your history. What's the history of your brand? You, your team, your industry, your locality, your experience. What can you use from this history to form the basis of a great story to tell potential customers? And particularly when you're looking at the history of brand, someone like Simon's on here is brilliant at that, at looking at, the history and understanding where your brand comes from to really help kind of get the design right for you. So tap into that history. Secondly, we need to look at your brand. And again, I'm no expert marketer, but I do know about using a story to sell or to communicate. So let's look at your brand and let's look at brand storytelling. I love this definition. Using a narrative to connect your brand to customers with a focus on linking what you stand for to the values you share with your customers. I'll repeat that again. Using a narrative to connect your brand to customers with a focus on linking what you stand for to the values you share with your customers. So what do I mean by narrative? Well, it means the storytelling elements. It means character, settings, conflict, action, climax, impact. Creating those points allows your audience to kind of easily follow along with you on a story and they remember it. But we'll go into those elements later. What you stand for, so part of that definition, is the very essence of who you are. It's a posh way of saying, why do you exist? So why do you exist? Well, someone like Simon Sinek, and a lot of you probably heard of him, it does has written a great book on this, a great TED talk about the why of your business. Why do you exist? Why do I tell stories? Well, a lot of you have heard me telling you about my great grand Alice, who was an amazing storyteller. And I get my inspiration from her. I come from a long line of very strong females. And my great grand Alice was no different. She was about just under 5 foot. I think she's shrunk over the years because she died when she was 99. But she grew up in London, kind of the turn, born before the turn of the century, before 1900. And she told me all about kind of what it was like growing up in London, how she met my great-grandfather, and particularly that she used to be able to cycle across London. Can you believe that? Cycle across London. That's how small London was at that time. But she just inspired me a great love of storytelling and imagination. Wayne said earlier, I mentioned a couple of well-known brands. Nike, for example. If you think about why they exist, it's not about trainers. For them, at the heart of it, it's athletic excellence. Disney, apart from the amazing money-making machine that they are, and merchandise and movies and theme parks, I know, I have a 10-year-old, but to them, at the heart of what it is, it's family happiness. That's why they exist. So again, think about the why. Now let's think about the values. What are your values? Well, they're the personality of your company that define it, particularly if it's your company. Your values are the personality of your company that represent and reflect you. What I don't like is when a lot of companies randomly say their values are things like, oh, integrity, innovation, and honesty. They just pluck them out the air and they choose those words because they sound good and they feel they should have something like that. But they don't really truly reflect who they are. Have you ever sat down and thought about your values? I imagine some of you probably have. So if we've looked at kind of what your brand story, then we've already looked at history. We looked at the why of your business. Why did you set up? Why do you exist? And by the way, it's not about making money. It's a byproduct of success, profit, and money. The why is going to drive you. We've looked at the values and the personality of business. And lastly, then we look at the values you want your customers to have. Building a tribe is a great way to do that. And you can do that through fantastic experts, social media experts. You can do that through podcasting. You can do it through lots of different ways in building a tribe. And a tribe has a collective ability, a collective set of values. What do you want them to feel when they walk away having bought from you? For me, it's about fun, but more importantly, it's about sense of being cared for. I want our clients to feel, our customers to feel a sense they've been cared for, they've been looked after, and more importantly, their stories have been respected. That's the values that, for me, that's really important that our customers have as well as we do. And fourthly, we need to actually create a story, which is where we're going to start now. Now, as we're a small group, if you've got any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the chat because I can happily add them on as we go along. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go along. Creating a story. Now, we're quite a fast-paced modern world, aren't we? We live in quite a fast-paced modern world. We're pretty much overwhelmed with information data. I've been on holiday for the last week and purposely my phone has not been attached to me. In fact, it's been put in the safe on a daily basis and I'm not allowed to know the code. It's put there deliberately by my wife to stop me doing what I normally do, which is, I'm just going to check my emails or just going to check Facebook. Oh, 7 o'clock in the morning when everybody's asleep, I'll just quickly nip onto LinkedIn. So I've had all those apps deleted, apart from Messenger. I was allowed to have Facebook Messenger on this week, but I'm only allowed to have the phone once a day. So standing out in a kind of a modern, fast-paced world, we need to connect with our audience, don't we? Quickly and emotionally. That's the two key things, quickly and emotionally. Being a faceless entity no longer can cut it. Even the big boys are struggling because they are seen as a faceless entity. We need to transport our customer using a story to a world where we can help them. We need to make it memorable. A story is 22 times more likely to be remembered than any facts or data. 22 times more likely to be remembered than just facts or data. You'll remember some of the stories I've told you today. You probably won't remember any of the tips or advice I've given you, and that's okay. So there are many different types of stories, and I'm going to give you some examples of ones that may help you in your business. So the first one is a me or self story, a me story. Now, you're going to have an expert workshop later from Karen about how you construct, stories and construct a book much better than I can ever attempt to do. But a me or self story is an excellent example of how we can look at how do stories have stories driven us. So I'll give you an example. Steve Jobs' famous commencement address at Stanford University in 2015, he shared three stories he shared, which largely a personal reflection of his life. So he shared his humble working class upbringing and dropping out of college, which I didn't know about. He found about founding and later getting fired by Apple, which of course is well documented, and then his cancer diagnosis. And what I didn't know at the time is that he talked about his passion for calligraphy. That later guided a lot of his design work for Apple, and how his cancer diagnosis encouraged him to live more passionately and authentically, as every day was his last. What's so compelling about Jobs' speech is how real and raw his story seemed. Each story gave an audience a glimpse into who he was, his values, his passions, what made him tick. And people really connected with it and remembered it. So a great story of self, or me, i.e. you, has to be authentic and genuine. Finding that story may require deep reflection of your past, any values that you share, maybe sharing a personal experience or moment with your audience. Now, can I just put a word of caution in there? And I know, like Brad talks about this when he talks about speaking, only be prepared to share something that you are happy to share. Because something like this, a story like that, will go out into the audience and be shared again. So only think carefully about the stories you want to share. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is yet to come. That's a direct quote from the late Steve Jobs. So for me, what drives me a lot of the time is making people feel better. Now, at school, I was a bit of a joker or a clown. You might be surprised. I like making people laugh. For me, that was a good thing of getting out of trouble normally because I hadn't done my homework. I wasn't a great student. And, you know, for me, it's again, making human connections with people. Like the time when I accidentally kind of not stole but borrowed the skeleton from the biology lab and stuck it on a toilet in the middle of the lacrosse pitch in the sweeping drive up to the school with a cigarette in his hand and a newspaper. Or creating clay pellets and fashioning a catapult that I could use in Latin classes and fling clay pellets at the big blackboard, just driving my Latin teacher insane and setting the whole class off into hysterics. Them or us stories. Now, this is less about you, this is about your audience, your customers. So it could be connecting the values with broader values shared by audience, as we talked earlier. So weaving your personal story into the experience, values, passions of others. And I know some of you are great at doing that. And then there's now or future stories, which we're going to talk about a little later. So I hope for now you're starting to think about maybe some stories that you can tell about to your audience, to your potential customers, maybe about yourself, maybe about another customer, maybe that you've client that you've helped. Think about that. How can I construct a story? Now, I'm going to give you a really great way to do that. There's a really classic way of creating a story, and it's one that's been shared over thousands of years. And again, nothing new, even though we like to say we think we've come up with something new. It's called the 3-act structure. Again, posh way of saying a start, middle, and end. Start, middle, and end. If you do nothing but create a story with a start, middle, and end, then you've done a really great job. So let's look at the start, the opening. Now, this is the backstory. This is introducing your characters. It's setting the scene. Think carefully about the character or characters. So it could be Sue, for example, who comes to you, who needs to get her message out there more. She's no idea how she's getting a message out there. She thinks she's got a great product and service, but she thinks her message is being lost. Yeah, set the scene. Who is Sue? What's Sue like? Where's her background? What's her history? So think about that. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. A great opening line from The Tale of Two Cities. Think about the impact you want to make. Think you could start with an opening that's meant to shock. For example, the snow in the mountains was melting and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came out to understand the gravity of our situation. We want to know more, don't we? Who was Bunny? How did she or he die? Was it an accident? Who are the rest of the party? This is a real teaser. I've got more questions. I want to know more. Then there's an opening where maybe you may want to talk about the description of the history that brought your customer to this point. So it could be, for example, if you're an IFA, it could be a couple that are found out they're pregnant, so they need to upgrade their house. You know, they're living in a 1-bedroom flat, they suddenly need, oh, actually now we need a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom house. Okay, so what's their backstory? Introduce the characters, Paul and Sue, before you get any further. Sometimes actually bad choices can make it also a very good opening for a story. Who's the narrator in this story? Is it you or the customer? Karen will love that, I think. Is the narrator you or the customer? Then there's the middle part of the story, Act 2. We've had our little interval, we've had our ice cream, we've come back. And unfortunately, there's a struggle or challenge. Aliens are invading the Earth. You can tell I'm a Marvel fan. And Iron Man and Captain America are deciding to fight in different areas and not really getting on. There's a trigger that leads to a struggle or challenge. Your customers don't come to you just because you're doing a fantastic job, let's say on social media. They come to you because they realize they have a problem. They may have a problem, they may not realize it yet. Okay, so this is really important. There's a trigger. What is the trigger? So when we're creating a story, we must put the trigger in there, because we often forget that. We think about how fantastic we've helped someone with their problem, but what actually took Paul and Sue to the point of thinking, I need to get someone's help. And finally, there's the end. Da, 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 they have invaded the Earth and we have solved it. We've killed the aliens and we've saved the Earth. Fantastic. There's a great solution. There's a realization and an impact. And I say this quite a lot to people, that your impact that you have in your customers may not be seen for 3, 6, 9, 12 months. Keith is a great one to tell you about this, he's a great storyteller. When he says about the stories, how he's helped customers, it could be helped sometimes 6, 12, 18 months down the line. Think about that. Think about the impact. Why do I love storytelling? Well, I mentioned earlier about my great-grand, but also I used to love to read comics. I loved the Beano. I was a massive Beano fan, and I instilled that love into my 10-year-old daughter, who's absolutely obsessed with the Beano. I used to make up stories, and let me into a little secret. I was shocking, absolutely shocking at English literature and language, mainly because they made us study really boring stories. And actually, my editor and my wife say I have an over-enthusiastic love of commas in my writing. But for me, it was just the imagination, tapping into the imagination and telling stories. And then later when I joined corporate life, I used to tell stories to my customers and as a manager. And then I published a children's book with my daughter a couple of years ago. And that to me was accumulation of just the love of tapping into my imagination. So let me give you some tips. Your story must be true, unless you're writing fiction for an example and you tell people this is an example. Because if you tell an untrue story to your customers, your potential audience out there, they will see through it. Include pictures as often as you can. You can have the great, amazing Vicky Head on later, talking, as a photographer, just use video as much as you can as well. Really important. Images really bring a story alive. Make sure the insight you're going to give is something that the audience really can see the benefit of solving. There's no point targeting a particular group of people, and again, expert marketeers will tell you how to create that group with the story that is not going to resonate with them. Make it brief, and please no waffling, and remove all that jargonistic language. People, particularly who work in finance or IT or anywhere that's got great terminology, please remove it. Because all it does is separate you from the audience. It doesn't lend you to any credibility, it just separates you. Let me also talk to you, as we've got a little bit of time, about some other examples of storytelling structure. You've all, or should have done, watched The Lion King, a great Disney film. And in there, that's the hero journey. Okay, this is the hero who has to overcome a series of challenges to reach the peak and arrives home a changed person. Or you can go back, as I'm in Crete at the moment, Theseus and the Minotaur, another fantastic hero overcoming a series of challenges. You may also want to use spark lines, which is a great structure, spark lines. And I talked about earlier about kind of the future. Martin Luther King was amazing at this. And this is about where you want your audience to draw parallels between now, reality, comparing what is now, and an improved world. What could it be like if they worked with you? Paint them a picture, use emotive language. Okay, my last few tips for you. To become a great storyteller, don't rush. Ask the listener to imagine. Tap in to that side of their brain, which is all about imagination. You want to take them on that journey. Highlight the emotional elements. People buy emotionally, justify logically. even if it's a cup of coffee, for a split moment, there's an emotional attachment to that. You might not even be aware of it. It might be in your unconscious or subconscious level. But we all buy emotionally, we then justify logically. Observe others, watch people, listen to their stories and conversations. I have loved people watching around the pool the last week. It's just been fantastic. It's a wealth of information and storytelling and stories being told. Have a notepad or make notes on your phone. Great stories for me tend to pop into my mind at the most unopportune moment. Normally when I'm driving, which is not great. So I will press record on my phone, so I'm safe. And literally I will just talk into my phone. Or normally in the shower, that's another classic one, isn't it? When you have a great story, probably not take your phone there or notepad, but jump out the shower and just make a note of it. And more importantly, my top tip for any great storyteller is let it flow. Focus on the message and not on the words initially. Let it flow, focus on the message and not on the words initially. Let me leave you with one last story, which some of you might have heard before, but it's one of my favorite stories. There was this old gentleman walking along the beach, and in the distance he saw a young boy who seemed to be picking something up from the beach and throwing it into the sea. As he got closer, he could see the beach was littered with loads of starfish, and this young boy was picking up a starfish and throwing it into the sea. He stopped and asked the boy what he was doing. He said, "Well, sir, if I don't throw these starfish into the sea and leave them on the beach, they will surely die. But how can you hope to save all these starfish? There's too many of them." At which point the young boy picked one up and threw it into the sea and said, "But I saved that one." Thank you very much for listening. My name is Sas Huntwood, the storyteller.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sas. We've got loads of time, so I would invite questions from everyone here. If you've got anything you'd like to ask Sas, please send it through now. But Sas, that's absolutely great. Yeah, I love that. I love those. I am disappointed that we didn't get a frozen version of Let It Flow at the end. I'm afraid I'm very disappointed that exactly.
You don't want to hear me singing. That's one thing I cannot do. I very few, a lot of things I can't do, but singing is definitely not something you want to hear. Right?
Okay, fair enough. So when you work with clients, do you find people find it difficult to find their story or to work out how best to work that out?
Yes, I think so. I think often a couple of reasons why. We can be quite humble about us. We don't think of ourselves as anything special, or our story being anything particularly special. We may go, well, I've had quite an ordinary background, it's not particularly anything exciting. And that sometimes I find that with people. Other people, I think, again, they don't know quite where to start. How far do I go back? Which bits do I pull out? How long do I make it? Is it too short? Is it too long? So definitely using a structure helps. And I know Karen will talk about this later when she talks about, kind of structure but for me, it's about tapping into your history. And everybody has a story to tell because you're unique. We're all unique, and no one has the same story as you. So no one's heard your story. No one's had the same story as you. So therefore, my belief is the world deserves to hear your story, because it can have an impact on one person, that one starfish. And that to me is huge, because if everybody could have an impact on one starfish, one person with their story, well, that's quite impactful. It's all cumulative. So that was, I would definitely start thinking about, your own background, your own history, and what brought you to this point. Sure.
Fantastic. Keith's got his hand up, so he either needs a toilet or he's got a question. Sorry, that's about the 5th time we've used that gag today. It's only I've got. Keith, over to you.
It is a classic gag. It's the way you tell them. Absolutely. Sas, I've got a question. You shared with us earlier that a story is, I think you said, 22 times more likely to be remembered than facts or data, which really highlights the power of the story. But how can we best weave facts and data in? For example, how could you weave that fact into a story?
It's a great question. I think that data storytelling, there's a whole tranche of new kind of research into data storytelling, because it's particularly the way marketers work now, and brand marketing, and you look, any marketing expert, a lot of it is data driven. So, they look at, whether you're just looking at your stats of your, social media hits through to the impact of an advertising campaign, it's all data driven. So yeah, if you need to put a stat in there, so if you want to say someone was X times more likely to do something, or after working with you, they were 75% more likely to do something, or 75% less to do something, or we saved them 30% of savings or something, put that in there, but weave it into the story. But don't just lead with it. Set the scene first and introduce the problem, the characters, and setting the scene before you go straight into the stat. What I tend to find is when people are telling a story, they lead with the statistic and data first, and I've got no emotional connection with the story yet, with the character. You haven't built up the plot enough for me to go, okay, now I get it. You almost want to use the data as a punchline at the end. But remember that data also tells a story. So if you help someone save them 30% in their, of their expenditure or something, what does that actually mean? It enabled them to then save to go on holiday or something. Or if you were able to save, 75% decrease in something or other, then or increase their hits, the number of hits, say podcasting. So with Gary and okay, well, it increased their hits on their website and their social media by X%. What did that actually mean? Don't just leave it at this data and then allow the audience have to go, oh, what does that actually mean, and translate. Tell the audience, what did that mean for Sue? Does that answer your question, Keith?
Yeah. So by all means use the data, but create the story first so that the data has a context, so it'll be more likely to be remembered, and then add the so what, so they can see the results, and that way they're more likely to remember. So basically give it the context and a reason you'd want to remember it.
Yeah, we want to build into that. We want to connect with Sue. We want to connect with that Sue today. I change the name every week, but you want to connect with that audience, that customer, and they want to connect with the person in the story. So by the end of it, putting it into like a neat little bow and saying this has enabled Sue to do this, we can then connect with the character more.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sas.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Has anyone else got any questions they'd like to ask? I think I think that was brilliantly done. I mean, yeah, my example, we use Nike and Google. I think Apple are the ones that use it the most obvious, because they literally build the story. You get the chief engineer telling you why you picked that metal and why they picked this and why they're doing it, and show you the whole process. And you really, they are, they're a squillion dollar company.
Another very good company that does that, Netflix. They're the business of storytelling. They're extremely good at storytelling. They have an amazing company culture, but their whole way they structure themselves and work is all around stories and storytelling. So another great company to look at how they tell their stories and how they use their brand and marketing to tell a story. So if you wanted to find another company like Apple, I would definitely look at Netflix as another example. And then of course Disney. You can't beat Disney as a storytelling giant. They have pretty much got it down to a fine art. We talk about the fact they churn out stories time and time again. They're just a phenomenal giant at it. You look at something like a children's author like David Baddiel, or particularly David Williams, he's now got a recipe that he just can churn out 2-3 books a year, because he's just got something he's found a storytelling structure that works and an audience that wants to listen to it. Yeah,
brilliant. I mean, that's it just makes so much sense. I've just got to find myself. Have you ever had a story you weren't able to tell? Do you get some interesting stories from your clients? Is there anything that pops to mind where you've gone, yeah, we probably won't say that. We probably find, have you got something?
Some people can be a little it depends on the character. I will never say don't say that, because it depends on, they know their audience better than I do. Well, we might word it a slightly different way. So I had a great friend who was also a client who was a funeral director, and used humor quite a lot in her storytelling, which sometimes worked and sometimes didn't, because she had quite a black humor, and I think you probably have to be a funeral director. So I said, perhaps we just need to reword it slightly, because you're losing some of the audience because of the type of humor you're using. So we tweaked her story slightly to take away some of the dark humor that was in there, to make it keep it light, but just change it slightly. And I say I'm no expert in words. You've got someone like Matt who's coming on later and talking about copy. He's an expert in words. But it's more about how it flowed and how the audience was going to take it.
They hadn't followed your lead and were sitting corpses up in the chair in the waiting room with the copy of the Times and stuff. Just
yeah, I got into a bit of trouble.
Creeping people out as you walked in. I shouldn't give people ideas, really, should I? Right, if there's nothing else, I think we're going to... Oh, Mr. Jones.
I've got one more question. I think this session's been really fantastic, so thank you, Sas, for streaming in. It's been brilliant. The question I've got is, have you got a particular brand or company or something that you've kind of seen that you thought, do you know what, I would love to work on that as a kind of a dream project for you?
For get their storytelling right, who could turn it around?
Or actually, do you know what, they've got a great product, but it could be tweaked slightly.
That's a great question. I'd love to get hold of Boris Johnson and the cabinet from a storytelling perspective. Oh my goodness, they need some help. So that would be quite a mountain to climb. That would be a real challenge. Storytelling from their perspective. I'd love that. I'm trying to think a brand that I really enjoy storytelling. Not that I can think of. I think majority when you get a really good product, a really good service, majority of the time someone will get hold of them and create a great machine behind them and a great storytelling machine. You look at something. I was talking to someone this morning saying how 2008 brought the rise of Amazon and Google and Netflix and Airbnb and all those companies who really came out of a massive financial crisis because they saw the potential. People saw the potential, investors saw the potential, but there was a great story and behind it, and they told a great story. Hence why they're the giants they are now, whereas the other giants that were giants have now kind of disappeared or declined.
I think we'll be getting something similar with the pandemic and the amount of companies. I think there's a lot of companies out there that need to make sure they've got their story ready about how they've managed to prosper during the last 18 months.
I think you're right, Wayne. I think there's quite a few, and there's great opportunity, I think, coming out of this from a story perspective. Some stories that could be shown around resilience, and as a company owner, how you've also shown resilience through the last 18 months. And don't be afraid to tell those stories. Don't be afraid to tell the story about how those times when you had sleepless nights, or you wonder where you're going to pay your bills, or you had to confront your other half who's telling you to get a real job. All those times that you've had in the last 18 months, those moments tell a great story for your future customers.
That's a great point, and I think that, and actually, from you went around on the thing earlier, but I think it's talking to Dan Sadler about Facebook and putting stuff like that. I think that's it sort of all hinges together that people get to know you as a person and use that story to bolster your image and your brand, etc., etc. I think that really ties together really nicely. So thank you very much for your time, Sas. Unless anyone else has got any questions, I think give it out once more for Sas, all the way, an international speaker, all the way from Crete, if I remember correctly. Are you, because you've done a talk today, are you allowed an extra hour on your phone now? That's the question. Are you going to be allowed an extra hour to?
I don't know. I'm having an extra hour in the bath, maybe.
Okay, either of those will do. Perfect. Well, enjoy the rest of if you're staying there. Enjoy the rest of your stay out there. Thank you so much for coming once again, Sas Huntwood, and a great session to start our last session of the day with. Thank you very much.